One of the other controversies I wanted to get your take on here, Andrew, is at Laurier University, where, of course, you've got now this young grad student who was censored for daring to show a video clip of an interview with Jordan Peterson on public cable television in Ontario. And I know that you had, in the Conservative leadership race, put forward an idea that any university that doesn't protect free speech should have its federal funding yanked. And I'm wondering from this case if this is one that would be a contender for that, to such an extent that you, as Prime Minister, if you had that role right now, would invoke that provision that you talked about in the leadership.
Well, I'll tell you, the reason why I proposed this idea in the leadership campaign is precisely for the types of things that are happening on campus, and specifically what happened to Lindsay Shepherd, as you mentioned, a grad student who had the audacity to show her students both sides of a debate on a current issue, on something that was before Parliament just recently. And to think that we've got to the state in Canada where a university would have an inquisition on a young grad student and make comparisons to Hitler, to bully her, to tell her that she was, committed acts of violence by showing a clip from a public broadcast on a public broadcaster is ridiculous. And I think it's a very sad state of affairs that a university would set up this kind of inquisition into what happened when a grad student dared to show a conversation about a current issue. And I think the stifling of free speech is of growing concern to many people on all sides of the political spectrum. And there's a reason why in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, free speech and free expression are so high up on the list, because they are the fundamental building blocks for all the other freedoms that we enjoy. And I certainly think that what happened to Ms. Shepherd was egregious. And this is exactly why I believe we need to have a conversation in Canada about protecting free speech, specifically on university campuses.
Would this situation, from the information that is available and Laurier's decision to stand by, it sounds like, the process that really put Ms. Shepherd in the hot seat here, would that qualify for what it was that you were talking about, as circumstances where funding should be pulled from the federal level?
Well, it certainly is one of this type of thing is certainly the reason why I proposed the policy. I've committed to sitting down with university officials. I've already met with some university administrators from across Canada. I want to put forward an objective set of criteria, because we don't want to have a subjective framework where one political party or the next can determine what those objective criteria could or should be. But I'm confident we can get to a place where we can just say, look, for heaven's sake, a discussion in a classroom where other professors were cited, where a professor in good standing at another accredited university in Canada was giving his position on why he opposed a federal piece of legislation, should not result in someone being hauled before an inquisition body and threatened with their job and threatened with sanction for doing that. Universities were founded to have that kind of robust debate. The purpose of a university is to find truth through discussion and debate and conversation, sometimes rigorous, sometimes about difficult issues. Universities were not designed to implement one particular group's agenda or another. And I believe that the federal government can play a role in encouraging universities to achieve that by prioritizing funding to schools that have some kind of a framework to protect free speech.
I just want to clarify your position. You're not talking about whether you would intervene in the Laurier case in this particular example, but the situation wholly is what you'd like to come up with a policy that avoids moving forward.
Exactly. The specific policy is that right now the federal government gives different grants to different research chairs, and they prioritize it based on a series of criteria. For example, the Liberals announced this year that they would prioritize federal funding to universities that achieved diversity targets. So the government has already endorsed the idea that different criteria can be used to prioritize funding. What I'm saying is that I would add an additional criteria of which schools that actually have a regime in place to protect free speech, so that radical groups can't cancel events, so that campus clubs can't get decertified, so that university professors don't have their seminars canceled, and that there's some kind of system in place to allow for debate and conversation among the faculty and the student body. I believe that's reasonable. I think more and more Canadians are, regardless of where they stand on specific issues, are appalled at the fact that we're losing our ability to have these points of view, to engage in debate, to argue with one another. And when we lose that as a society, we only end up in a worse place. Every point in human history where authoritarian regimes take hold, and people lose other freedoms, it always starts with curtailing free speech and limiting the right of people to object, to dissent, and to hold different points of view.